Bonjour, everybody. My name is Michael Brown, and I will be moderating this webinar today. And first, I'd just like to open us up in a good way with a prayer. So I want to say, Gitchi Miigwech to Mother Earth for all of her gifts that she brings us and all of the nurturing and all of the comfort that she provides all of us. I want to say Gitchi Miigwech to Father Sky, everything in between. I want to say Gitchi Miigwech to Grandfather Sun and Grandma Moon for taking care of the men and the women. And I want to say Gitchi Miigwech to Thunderbird for taking care of those in between. And I want to say Gitchi Miigwech to Shkode and Nibe, the fire and the water, for all their blessings and teachings and gifts. And I want to say Gitchi Miigwech to all of our ancestors and all of the work that's been done so that we can sit here today and share our work in a good way. And so with one mind and one heart, I say Gitchi Miigwech and all my relations. And with that, I would like to introduce Dr. Michael Doyle, who is going to speak with us today and share a little about Aboriginal men's health and wellness and the relation to substances in the correctional facilities. So I'll pass it over to Dr. Doyle.
Thank you, Michael. So I'm, as Michael said, I'm Michael Doyle. I'm a Bardi man. My people are from the Kimberley region of Western Australia. I'm going to do a little bit more of an introduction because I'm presenting in a different country. And so I'll start sharing my slides if I can. We practiced this just a little while ago, and hopefully this all comes up. Yeah, that's on full screen, right?
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so I work at the University of Sydney. I'm in the School of Medicine, and I work in the discipline of addiction medicine within that school. Most of my colleagues, I'm pretty much, I think I'm the only Aboriginal person in the discipline of addiction medicine. There's a few of us in Sydney Medical School. Most of my colleagues are clinicians. I also part of the Edith Collins Centre within Sydney University. I just want to start by acknowledging the traditional caretakers of the land on which we meet here today. The Huron, Wedat, the Seneca, and the Mrs. Vargas of the Creed, and pay respects to their elders past and present. I hope I pronounced that correctly, and I was practicing how to pronounce that. So I want to pay my respects there. I want to pay respects to all First Nations, Canadian people here today, First Nations, Aboriginal, Torres, Strait Islander, Australians, of course, and other First Nations peoples as well. It is NAIDOC Week in Australia, so happy NAIDOC Week to everybody back home. NAIDOC Week is a week of sort of celebration, but also protest of what's happening in Australia to bring attention to our situation, but also celebrate our culture. So there's 4 parts of this. It's a bit of a long presentation, but we're going to sort of break in between each of these different parts. So I'm going to tell you a bit about my story, and then Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander health. My focus is more addiction medicine, so a little bit of that kind of statistics rather than the sort of other stuff like chronic disease, diabetes and stuff. That's not really my area, so we can talk about substance use. Some of my past research and some of the current research as well. So a little bit about me. The photo in the middle is my grandfather and his contemporaries. This photo was taken about World War I. And so it's a very old photo, and my grandfather's sitting on the rock with his legs sort of hanging down the side of the rock. This photo was taken on the islands off the mainland in Bardi country. I'll show you a bit more detail what that looks like in a moment. Everybody in my community is pretty much related to one of these old fellas, yeah. So the photos going around clockwise on the We've got Juddingan Community, and you can see the map of Australia. Juddingan Community is my home community. The photo below there is Professor Sherry Saggers, or she's retired now. She was the academic I met when I joined the university in Perth 16 years ago, Curtin University, and she kind of really helped me and put up with a lot of my crap in the early days and persevered with me, and I'm very grateful for her efforts towards my developing my career. The person on the right is my dad, and photo below is Mum Benny, which is my mother's sister. I don't actually use photos of my mother when I'm presenting, but Mum Benny came to my graduation for my PhD, which was in 2018. On that day, she grabbed the plaque. She's kind of walked you around everywhere with the plaque, just kind of holding that up. So she's very happy that day. There's a few other photos there. I live in Sydney. I've been in Sydney for about 12 years now. And I try to get up to my own community as often as I can. The photo there, that's also fairly old, with the tank in the background. That's Mum Benny is on the right, and that's her mum and dad, couple. Yeah, just there. And there's another photo down the beach with my two nieces, Talia and Ricky. And there's Mum Benny and Mum Laurel, her mum's surviving sisters. So we've got about 6 within the family, and these two, there's 8, those 2 boys, with me now extended family. So a few more photos there. So these are at different time periods. So none of my family currently lives, my direct family currently lives on country, but you can see there my assistant teaching the 2 girls to fish, and fishing is a big part of our traditional life, although the way in which we fish has changed a bit. We didn't have those hand reels and things like that, but we're still very much what we call saltwater people, and the ocean also. There's the photo there of Mum Laurel in the middle on the right hand side. That's Ricky, sorry, who's you can see her 3 times in those photos at different ages across there. And then the photo down here on the bottom right hand corner is just recently, earlier this year, when I visited. So I wanted to show you a little bit of a story as well, which Mum Laurel's going to tell. And if we can swap over to the video, that would be great. So this is a story about 2 of my grandfathers. When I said to Mum I was doing this presentation, I said I should tell a story, and then she had recorded one. So this is pretty cool.
This is my story from my 2 grandfathers from Chili Creek. Their names were Jan and Gadi. Well, the story is about when people used to live around Janyan area and Chili Creek along the foreshore, and in that time,
Maybe I'll put stop sharing, and then there you go.
it was hard, there were big storms, and one day they were starting to getting hungry, and kids were getting sick and all that, There was just no feed, no meat or anything. They had to send a couple of boys, young men, to chili picked up on the hills and came out to the 2 grandfathers. And they said, oh, them people are hungry there. They need, like we say, al and all that. Next time we can go out on Galo and I think it was to go hunting for terrorists and all that. All right, the old man said, go back to the camp and send word for other tribes along the coast, in like from around Yanyan area and Lamina tribe, come and wait on the beach. You guys go back now, go back to the train and tell them they feed will be waiting for them on the beach. And then the two old men sat up all night. It was raining, then start to rain. They start to sing, chanting all night. One was blind, one was deaf. They sang and chanting all night till it was daybreak. They sang a wail right outside. All night I was chanting to tend that whale to say alien changes direction back to the beach. They sing it. And then I will turn back and then from the beach here. And when the tribe got up, they looked and they start to signal with smokes. And the people used to see the smoke signal. Everybody came from everywhere, all down. They came to the beach here. There was that big whale. When they cut that piece of that mini whale, that I looked, they start to get Morgan means full. They went and took some piece over to the mother families and then all along the coast, and they was happy. And then they didn't forget to take some milk back to them, to all people's two brothers from Chili Creek. That's my grandfather. Magamanis. That's my mom's uncle's story. Kalayambay.
Oh, sorry, was there a little?
Oh,
bit
no,
more
no, it just, mum has a bit of a laugh at the end. So I'll go back to sharing. There you go. So yeah, I'll give you a little bit of a look around my community. So this is just driving down. I haven't been to a reserve. There's no audio on this, but to a reserve here. But I'd be pretty curious. So in different communities look different, and this is just driving down one of the roads. There are about 300-400 people in that community. So we're like, there's a big sand dune just up the back there, and then you go down onto the main beach, which is also where we do a lot of our cultural, our law time is down on the beach. So we turn right and go up over the beach, and then down here is down towards the old mission. So I'd be really interested in visiting a reserve at some point. But yeah, so this is where the community is, and this is the ranger map. So the orange sort of colour up the top there is Bardi Jowie. So I say on Bardi Jowie is both mainland and on the islands. So you can see some islands off the coast there. We are the one people though, but on land. So I say Bardi. We have native title over just about over the whole area. So the map, the ranger map is pretty close approximation of native title. I remember sitting in court down in Perth, the capital of Western Australia. I had no idea why. I was 20 or something, sitting there with my cousins, pressed them. And we're like, what are we doing here? And it was for the native title hearings. We actually won the case, but the elders made us go to court, and we don't understand why we have to do these things. I'm sure some of you are the same, because they wanted to show the young people of Bardi Jowie country the court and show us all sitting there, but we were interested in it. And so we won native title about 40 years ago. I shouldn't know the exact date, but wouldn't have been 40, it would have been about 30 years ago. We got native title, which is fantastic. We're pretty much the only, it's sort of cul-de-sac, like it's not a through road as well. So it's, if you're coming up to the peninsula, you're coming to visit us, you're coming to visit our country, which kind of keeps it a bit private as well. So to the south, we have the Yolngu people. Main community is Beagle Bay, and down towards Broome is the Yaru people. And these are the sort of three nations within this part of the world. If you come to Bardi-Jawi country, you will see these signs. That's the sign going up over the beach. And basically you need permission to come in. And if you don't, our rangers pretty much turn up fairly quickly and ask you what you're doing and when you're leaving. You don't get asked how long you're staying for, you get asked when you're leaving, if you've not been invited. I worked in the community clinic, in the health clinic within the up there. That was my first job in Aboriginal health. Before that, I was working in the community store. I kind of did my schooling sort of down in Geraldton. We lived between Geraldton is a big place down the coast, close to Perth, but lived between there and the community. So the islands off the coast there, I'll show you. This is pretty recent. So this is going up along the inland towards the islands, and it's the waterway going through there. It's like a 6 metre tidal change. So there's massive volume of water flows between the mainland and the islands, and my people have navigated this waterway for tens of thousands of years, but you have to time it pretty well, because this is also what you see up there. So you have, because of the force of the water going through, you kind of have like these rivers formed within the ocean and massive big whirlpools formed between the islands and the mainland, and so it's pretty full on if you don't know what you're doing to navigate through those waters. History books written by Europeans would tell us in Australia that Aboriginal Australians did not navigate waters, did not travel between islands, were only isolated mainland. That's not quite true. Like a lot of the history books, I'm sure that have been written about First Nations, Canadians as well. I wanted to show this picture. This is from about 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I'm the co-chair of the Aboriginal Medical Research Council's Human Research Ethics Committee, but I work on that committee very closely with 3 elders in particular that are from New South Wales. I'll just point out, you can see that, yeah, cool. That's Summer May Finlay, or Dr. Summer May Finlay. She's the co-chair. And this is Uncle Danny Kelly there. He's a Wamba man. He's older. He's basically set up Aboriginal medical service in one of the main towns. So I work very closely with Uncle Danny. There's Auntie Rochelle Patton. If you've ever been to Melbourne, Auntie Rochelle is a Yorta woman. She's some of the trams in Melbourne are painted, and that is Auntie Rochelle's artwork on those trams. She's been a tremendous leader for our people in New South Wales. And down the front there is Auntie Valda Keat, or Val. Auntie Val, I'm very close to her. She's one of the most, she's an elder, she's a Rotary woman. She's one of the most senior Aboriginal people in New South Wales in Aboriginal health. And if I have any difficulty with anything, I will speak to her. If there's somebody giving me a hard time, I will ring her and ask her what to do about it or anything like that. So she's got tremendous support as well. And I work very closely with them, and I sort of thought of them when I went to your elders circle. these are the three elders I work very closely with in New South Wales. So that's a photo. I didn't realise that had been taken. My niece took it. That's my partner and I. He's a bit camera shy when I do presentations. But that's on the beach out front of our community. So that's a little bit about my story. Yeah, we can move on to the next bit, or if you have any questions or anything about, I don't know, the Kimberley or what it's like growing up there or anything. Happy to do that, or we can move on to health and substances if you like.
If anybody online has any questions or comments, please feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A section, and we can address those as they come up.
I always feel like I'm not a very good storyteller. I can tell the story of research really well, but telling my own stories seems to be something a bit hard for me. Thank you for, they're pretty dangerous as well, those whirlpools. Hey, well, we can move on. So that's it. Thank you. So this is a map of Australia, or what we call Australia these days, and you see the different Aboriginal nations across the country, across the mainland there. And in Tasmania as well. I'm not quite seeing down the bottom of that screen, are we? Oh, yeah, you can.
You can, sorry, it's just the.
Oh, it's just
Our setting.
how the setting is cool. Yeah, so there's over 100 easily different Aboriginal nations across the whole country. We also have, say, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, and the Torres Strait Islands are the group of islands between Queensland, or the tip there. You can see the red circle up there, and Papua New Guinea. They are their own unique group within Australia. So when we're talking national, we always say Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander. A lot of my work is New South Wales. We tend to say Aboriginal. Having said that, Torres Strait Islander people live across the entire country now as well. But, if you've ever wondered why I use that term, there is a freedom of movement between the Torres Strait, Papua New Guinea, and Australia. So if you're a Torres Strait Island living on the island, you can move freely between those. But it's between us and Papua New Guinea. Of course, they're related to people on both sides of the Pacific, on Papua New Guinea side as well. And this is Bardi country, is over here. So, there you go. So that's where we are. Our total area of landmass is not actually that big, but probably the size of Greater Toronto is the whole of Bardi country. So invasion or colonisation, so many different nations across the whole country, and the experience has been very, very different. So 1788 was when Europeans settled in Port Jackson in Sydney, and that was where the hammer hit hardest, as it said. In the Kimberley, 1837 to 1870. 1837 was when they sent some expeditions. We'd already had visits from Dutch sailors and that over the years, and that was in our stories as well. But this is when European British Australians, if you like, turned up there, and they settled about 1870. It's within living memory parts of the Kimberley when the first people were not Indigenous turned up to live in different parts of the Kimberley. So it's pretty recent impact. Impacts are ongoing, economic, dependent upon the new economy. The way in which things are done there would be very similar to here. So you're basically forced into the new way of doing things. Housing was not suitable, often worse located, and this is ongoing today. Education forced into English language and the sort of English education system. which doesn't necessarily work well for our people. I had this conversation the other day, because we have a very different learning style of seeing and doing, and not as theory based as the Western education model. So you actually practice what you're learning at that point, and that kind of style of education that we have doesn't work as well. There are changes, but there's ongoing issues, and yeah, but it's still a long way to go. Intergenerational trauma, or transgenerational, as I say, you don't have to experience an event to be affected by those events. So it could be your parents, your grandparents, your great-grandparents, but if they've been severely affected by trauma, the way in which that does kind of get passed through. I've got a short video about that in a minute. But yeah, so often what I find is people don't think what they're going through is intergenerational trauma. Some people do say, yeah, it's intergenerational trauma. Some people are just kind of, this is just the way life is. What else is there? But it's like, when you're doing research, it's not therapy, but it's interesting sitting there talking to somebody, and then they go, oh, they kind of think, yeah, actually, maybe, yeah. And then they kind of think a bit more about it, and yeah. So individuals, family, collective effect, trust in government. We've got a long history of the government saying very nice things and not delivering those things at all. And transference and trust in non-Aboriginal people. So transference of mistrust from one person to the other person, and just not trusting anybody who's not Aboriginal, because your experience has been so bad with other Aboriginal people. So these are sort of some of the effects that go on intergenerational trauma. So this is a short video here of the Healing Foundation. A few years ago, I did. The Healing Foundation has been very much sort of a women's based thing, but I did a bit of work a few years ago with the men's part of the Healing Foundation, and they do amazing work. And so this. Yep.
You'll stop sharing your screen.
Oh, I have to stop. Sorry. I did that last time. Okay, there we go. Yep.
History of our communities with information starts a long, long time ago. This was when our culture and our laws first started to slide. It's healthy. We've gone country and abided by our laws and ceremonies. Our families, our children were happy, with strong minds and hearts, because they were where they belong.
Colonisation came, bringing wars, disease, famine, violence, and the destruction and violation of our cultural laws, sacred sites, families, and communities.
We denied our knowledge, language, ceremonies, and identity, the very things that tell us who we are and where we belong, and our connection with each other and the land.
And then our children were taken from us. They had their names changed and their identities stripped away. They were told that Aboriginal people were bad. Worse still, they were told that their parents and grandparents did not want them.
Years this happened, and those children became as the following generations.
Our children were denied love and experienced physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. This left very deep, very complex, and very real wounds, leaving scars that are still being felt personally, socially, spiritually, and collectively.
In the time when our story started, we were able to parent in a comfortable way that has seen our family survive and thrive generations. Our people were strong, and our culture flowed and healed us in times of hurt.
But since the trauma of colonisation and the stolen generations, we have not been able to heal in the same way. And we have unknowingly passed this trauma on to our children through sharing our sad stories and having them witness and experience our pain. This is known as intergenerational trauma. And we see symptoms today in broken relationships, disconnected families, violence, suicide, and drug and alcohol abuse.
This is not where our story ends. We still have strong lives and hearts, and we still know who we were and where we've gone. By creating safe and strong communities together, supporting our families to be free from pain, returning to our culture and building the strength of identity, we can stop the cycle of trauma and bring about positive intergenerational change. Probably the thrive the next 50,000 is there are simple things that we can all do to help heal our body.
Visit healingfoundation.org.au to find out more.
Okay, so that's one of the Healing Foundation has a and I'm sure that probably be useful here in Canada as well. I'm sure you've got resources that we could use that would be useful as well. So I wanted to show that because you get a sense of the similarity of the story that's happened in Australia, and we have what we call the stolen generation. You've had residential schools and very similar effect. So when I'm doing work within the prison system, I'd say about 90% of the Aboriginal men I work with have in some way their parents or grandparents have been members of the stolen generation. I'm doing a bit of work here in Canada. That's pretty much what's happening. People are talking about the residential school system, and so the impact is very real. So some of the data I'm going to show, there's a reason why we see some of these trends. And these impacts today are very real. And so, but when we see life expectancy for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians is less than the non-Aboriginal Australians, really, I'm not sharing screens again, am I? Okay. Where are we? Yeah, we got that on screen. Cool. There we go. Cool. I think we'd all be Zoom champions after COVID, wouldn't you? So we see these impacts today, and this is one that we look at quite often. Really, Australia is a very healthy nation overall, but Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander Australians have lower life expectancy than others. You can see that for men and for women. Child removals, about 20,000 Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander children are in out-of-home care. That's the way they call the stat. Should just say out of home, because whether they're getting care or not is another matter altogether. There's big problems with our child welfare system in Australia, with kids being placed and never being checked as to whether they're going okay later and that kind of stuff. But yeah, huge number of Aboriginal kids in out-of-home care. Mental health, anxiety and mood disorders are almost 3 times the rate of those sorts of issues compared to other Australians. And you see there sort of very high level of psychological distress and self-harm. So self-harm, the rate of death from self-harm is about twice, and hospitalisation is about 3 times the rate for Aboriginal. We also have clusters of suicide, and there's a cluster in Kimberley, is a known place of my homeland for suicide. And just kind of happens in clusters, and it's pretty devastating what happens in cluster. So there's all these kinds of effects that are ongoing. So I could go on a few more stats, but that gives you a good sort of indication of where we're at. And of course, racism and the impact. There's more research being done on racism and the impact upon health in Australia. I'm not sure where you're at in Canada with the research around racism and impact on health, but showing that it does have an impact upon your mental health, of course, and your physical health. It impacts all parts of you. It's the way in which if you are being racially discriminated against. So looking at smoking or tobacco, which is something that's been introduced to Australia, and I understand tobacco is a traditional for your people. That was introduced in Australia, and we have very high rates of tobacco use, daily tobacco use. You see there, non-remote, remote. We've had a reduction, but that reduction in tobacco has been mainly in the non-remote areas and urban centres, where places like my home community remains a bit over half the community smokes every day. Tobacco is a major smoking, I should say. Smoking is a major leading cause of ill health in our communities. So this is a couple of different substances. This is if they've ever used in the last 12 months. You see there, cannabis is really one to highlight. We have a much higher level of cannabis use for our communities than mainstream Australia. This is only looking at Aboriginal data, but going almost 1/4 of the population to use cannabis in the last 12 months, according to the data. And daily use of cannabis is pretty common. When we look at alcohol consumption, this is a meta-analysis done by colleagues of mine a while ago, and it was pretty interesting what was found with that. And that was, if we look at alcohol use in the past year, so you can see the confidence interval is this line here. But what we see here is the only thing we can say for sure about alcohol consumption is that less Aboriginal people consume alcohol on a regular basis. The rest of the data, when they pulled all of the different surveys together about alcohol consumption levels, indicated that we don't know if our Aboriginal Australians actually drink more or less. But within the prison population, there's particular data that says some stuff. This is more population-wide. So we don't know, but of course there's a lot of stigmatisation around alcohol consumption in our communities. So that was just a little bit of a snapshot of health with a particular look at mental health and substance use. So happy to have any questions or anything.
I have a question. Is cannabis still illegal in Australia?
It's not very illegal, but yes, it is illegal. If that makes sense. Like you get cautions now.
Like it's decriminalized, I guess.
Yeah, so you've got to have a particular quantity to be charged, and then under a particular quantity, you get a caution. The research in New South Wales shows that Aboriginal people are more likely to be pursued through the courts than non-Aboriginal people for possession of cannabis by the police. Yeah. We could go into that, but yeah, it's one of those things. But it's not illegal. It's illegal, but not highly illegal. If that makes sense. So that,
Yes.
that,
Yes.
Any other questions?
If anybody online has any questions or comments, again, feel free to drop them in the chat. Otherwise, we can move on.
So that's a picture of the of Sydney Uni looking out towards the mountains. That's the main quad building, main tower from the university. Still issues of systemic racism. Sounds like yes, for sure there are issues of systemic racism. So I'll give some talk part of this talk and yes. So we're going to talk a little bit about some work that's been done. These papers that have been published over the last couple of years, and this data will relate to those papers. But first, I want to look at the imprisonment rate. So for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, you see here from 2005 through to 2023, mine works mainly in the prison system with drug and alcohol use issues. We see this ever sort of increasing imprisonment rate for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. You can track that back further, and it still has continued sort of upwards with a couple of bumps here and there, but it still keeps on going upwards afterwards. The other story that's happening there is non-Indigenous imprisonment has remained pretty much the same throughout that entire period. It's slightly higher now than what it was in 2005. But so you have a group of Australians for which imprisonment is increasing and the rest of the population imprisonment is not increasing. And so there really is something kind of fundamentally wrong. My understanding of your statistics here is it's a similar pattern, and a similar pattern in New Zealand as well, increasing Maori imprisonment in the country. So when we break this down, we've got eight to count them then, 8 jurisdictions in Australia. So six states and 2 territories. And so this is the imprisonment rate for each of those jurisdictions. My home state of Western Australia, the rate of imprisonment of Aboriginal people is going towards 6,000 people per 100,000. That, as far as I can find out, is the highest rate of imprisonment of any group in the world. Much higher than the imprisonment of African Americans in sort of deep South states and things like that. So this is the highest imprisonment rate of any group in the world. What we also see here is that the actual numbers of imprisonment. I was asked to always present the numbers by some Aboriginal colleagues as well. And so you see the number of Aboriginal people in prison is higher in New South Wales and Queensland. These are the 2 most populous Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander states. So about a third of the Aboriginal population lives in New South Wales and about a third live in Queensland. And that's why you see those numbers higher, even though the rate is higher in Western Australia. If we look at this, each jurisdiction, each state, or you'd say province, has its own legal system. But if we even just imagine the situation where changes were made within the legal system, we could imagine that you could see a reduction of imprisonment, couldn't we? If laws and ways in which things were done were changed in all the other states to be more reflective of Victoria, and we could see a change in this in the immediate sense in theory. But there doesn't seem to be much political will to change this at this point in time. Oh, no, I shouldn't put. There's a lot of talk, but no action. Is probably the better way. They talk about this being a crisis, but nothing actually genuinely changes. So this is looking at a bit of work I did around alcohol and substances, just looking at the alcohol by alcohol use disorder identification test, which is a screening tool that was developed by the World Health Organization. There's 10 questions on there and you score 21 4 of those. And you get a total score of either 0 to no consumption up to 40 if you're at the very most severe end of that. And this is looking at Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal people within the prison system in New South Wales. And you see no consumption, low risk, harmful, hazardous, and high risk, possibly dependent other categories on there, and you see Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal men, and there is a difference there with there being a higher proportion of Aboriginal men and high responsible dependent. See a similar trend for the women, but it's a smaller sample, and these are chi-squares and tests, and they're pretty basic statistical tests of chi-square. And we see this is overall a statistically sort of significant difference when we do that. What I will say is for our women who go to prison, they often have the worst health of any group within the prison system. So multiple issues, and often our women have a very long record of small offences, and then they've ended up inside, where the men end up doing something pretty big, going to people. So it's quite a different sort of profile between. And there's a faster rate of growth of imprisonment of our women than what there is for our men. So looking at audit again, and this is just the Aboriginal data, and looking at this compared to tobacco and other substances. So when we look at those different audit categories, we don't see there's any particular trends through tobacco use. What we do see is there is a significant association with cannabis use. Chi-squares don't necessarily show you directionality of association, they just show that there's a significance in that association. But you can see there with your eye that there's cannabis use and higher sort of alcohol consumption associated. Heroin or opioids, there's no particular association in this test, and amphetamine type substances. Did a few multivariate and bivariate analysis on this, and so in the bivariate we're just sort of comparing two factors. We found there was a significant difference when we look at just the low risk being 0 to 7 or high being 8 or higher in the audit for men to women, and you can kind of see there the odds of there being greater odds for I read this, for the women to be more in the high, for the men to be more in the high risk alcohol consumption group. You see cannabis use, there is a significant association for people who drink more and more likely to use cannabis as well. And for heroin, there is also association where people who were less likely to use heroin who also drank alcohol. There's a lot of other variables within this chart, but these are the significant ones that I've put together for this presentation. When you put this into a multivariate analysis, the significance for men and women actually falls away, and that's no longer significant. But the significant association between higher alcohol consumption levels and cannabis use still remains, and you can see it's a 0.01 p-value. For the heroin use or opioids, that remains significant as well. In multivariate analysis, when you put all the different factors together, and those were the two factors that remain statistically significant. So what we know from this is if we're doing alcohol and cannabis, we should be talking alcohol and cannabis together when we're doing prison-based programs, and that people who are using heroin are probably less likely to also be using alcohol. So this is some qualitative work, and it's a bit relates to these two papers. So this is a sample of about 14 Aboriginal men who were in prison when I interviewed them. A lot of them spoke about intergenerational alcohol use. These days I kind of expand on that question, but yeah, it was more narrowly defined back then. A lot of the guys said they'd been removed from their families, insecure housing, poverty as well. So they grew up in situations whereby it was kind of, they had the odds stacked against them and they'd ended up in prison. So you got Neil, this is a pseudonym, and he's talking about his father and problem with alcohol, and so did his father, and lots of alcohol and domestic violence and that kind of thing that was happening when he was growing up. That was a pretty good indication of what was happening with most of these men who were a similar background as well. And when they spoke about being removed from their families, a lot of them said that nobody ever came and checked if they were okay. So they got removed from their family, put over here, nobody came and said, are you okay living with this new family? So all kinds of abuse sort of went on as well. In terms of prison-based programs, and this is just a snapshot, so this is more what I'm doing now. A lot of, when I did a review of prison-based programs, a lot of the programs are based on US models that have been adopted to Australia. Of course, 12-step programs, CBD or cognitive behavioural treatment programs, which is more a suite of sort of stuff. It's not a specific treatment in itself, it's more a type of suite of treatment programs. Motivational sort of programs like your smart recovery and that kind of stuff, as well as psychoeducation, which is your promotion sort of thing. None of these pretty much none of the programs when I did that were specifically developed for Aboriginal people. There are only two I found back in 2018. So it's a few years ago now. What I found from the program when interviewing the guys about treatment programs, what works well for them. When asked about program facilitators, they said they really did appreciate well-trained staff as well as peer educators and people who really knew. If you ask them a question about addiction or about something and they could answer it, that was really appreciated. But also somebody who with some peer experience that could communicate well as well. So it kind of landed in that sort of recommendation of having well-trained peer educators working together. Having said that, peer educators can be well-trained and university qualified as well, but it was just sort of language the men themselves perceived the difference between the two. Empathy was the most important quality. So being Aboriginal was great if you were Aboriginal. But the thing was just really genuinely having empathy, which is the overriding main quality. Gender balance was preferred. The men preferred having at least one of the facilitators as a woman if they were doing group treatment programs. They felt like it just kept things more real, and the boys stayed under control more. They didn't get out of control if it was just men in the room. Some lived experience was the other thing. So when you do education up in the prison system, they tell you not to talk about yourself. It's really hard as an Aboriginal person not to say you're from somewhere and say, share a little bit of your story. That was really important, but also being able to talk from some experience, whether you are a person in recovery yourself or not, or just saying, I've got a cousin who's also had drug and alcohol issues, made a huge difference. Confidentiality is a must. Prison, the information is a commodity in prison, and gossip is just like the worst. So you have to be completely confidential at all times. And slightly older. So Aboriginal people, we are an ageist type. So if you're older, you have a bit more authority. But if you sort of think about it, if you're 35 or 40 and your drug and alcohol comes as 20, it kind of doesn't have the same impact as if they're the same age as you. But I'll be needing to turn it up. I'm softly spoken as well.
It's all right, well, good.
But okay, cool. So those are some of the core things found from that. So the content of prison-based programs found needed to be relevant. So the drinkers didn't like sitting through ITU or injecting drug use issues and that kind of stuff. They would just completely lose interest. So it needed to be relevant to your kind of drug of choice, basically. Practical, useful, and fun. They wanted to have fun and had to have a laugh to part of the stuff. Practical, the guy said if you sit there and think about how much you spend on cannabis and you work out what you can buy with that money instead, that was really useful when they did those practical type things. So that kind of thing. They said they like to repeat lessons, and this is an issue if in the prison system there's limited resources. So you get put in a program once and that's it. But these guys are saying you might need to do it 2 or 3 times, because you have to think through it and do it again and think through it and do it again. And so that was something that they really wanted. So in terms of therapeutic group, having a supportive group is critical, and there needed to be trust within the group. What happened though is, this is Siemens, as I said, you've got Rob here who's talking about when you've got a mixed group of both Koreans. Korea is a local term in New South Wales if you're Aboriginal, so I'm Korean Aboriginal in New South Wales. So if you've got the Korean brothers, but it's fine, you automatically trust the other brothers in the group. But if there's somebody who's not Korean, you won't share as much, you won't talk, and you've got to get to know that person really well. So if you're doing a short-term program, you're better off just having an Aboriginal only group, because they will immediately trust each other and be able to share, get to that therapeutic point much faster. But if you're doing a longer program, perhaps it's good having a bit of a mix, and you have non-Aboriginal people in the group as well, because they get to know each other and can get to trust each other. If there is just one person who's not trustworthy in the group, the entire thing just doesn't work, because everybody, it gets quiet because of the gossip. So the whole therapy breaks down in those cases. So in summary from this part of the presentation, so Aboriginal people were about 3.8% of the population, but 35% of the prison population. I showed you the rates of imprisonment for Australia. I did mention First Nations Canadians. From what I can see from the stats, you're in a similar situation, unfortunately. And it's easier to pull the federal prison population data than provincial prison population data, but I'm thinking provincial would be about the same, possibly worse, maybe. And for Maori, they're in the same situation, although they're a much larger proportion of the New Zealand or Aotearoa population overall, about 17% or so of the whole population. So we need more programs that are targeted and need to look at cannabis and alcohol. So the programs in Australian prisons tend to focus on opioids and on amphetamine use substances, but some of this work clearly shows that we need to be talking about alcohol and cannabis use as main substances within the programs. Both facilitations, co-facilitators, peers with lived experience. And you need to have a good therapeutic group with people who trust each other, as I explained, with Korea only group might be a good way to go for short-term programs, and they need to be relevant and fun. So this is a bunch of work I've done coming off my PhD, and yeah, and that's sort of been published. I'm happy to take questions or anything like that. I feel like this is really, really dry today, I have to say, but yeah. Did anybody have any questions? Yes.
I was just curious, like what the charges were for imprisonment and like duration, or
Yeah.
if, like, because I know in Canada I did a bit of research and I found that a lot of First Nations were charged higher than non-Indigenous, and that's why a reason for the high imprisonment rate. And also I was curious about like age groups as well, because I find First Nations are getting charged younger than non-Indigenous as well.
Yeah, so younger definitely. So the age profile is quite different. With Aboriginal performance likely to be younger, so for sure. Charges, I don't know. I get what you mean, but whether you're more likely to get a more serious sentence for the same offence. Is that kind of what you're saying? I don't know the answer to that. I haven't really looked at that. My gut tells me probably, but yeah, I couldn't tell you for sure. What I know though is Aboriginal Australians are more likely to return to custody than non-Aboriginal, so, and that's one of the big factors that's driving this, and some of the sort of stuff that I say about the work I do. So they're almost twice as likely to go back to prison as non-Aboriginal people. It's one of those things. and less likely to get parole than the other things. Some of the really strict rules they put in place for parole, where you've got to have residential address and all those sorts of things, make it harder for our more to get parole. So yeah, a number of factors, but I don't know, but probably quite a bit of overlap with your situation here.
And then I was curious, like, is there any sort of restorative justice programs in Australia?
So we have circle sentencing. You've got, looking, I was in BC before I came to find out, I'm talking about native court or something, or yeah, sorry, yeah. So similar concepts, and the like where you have the magistrate and the elders will sit together, and the hearing happens with them, and then you also talk to the person who you committed against, and then they work out what would be the most appropriate sentence for you. Right, yeah, so we call it circle sentencing. But I can't think of the name, but it's pretty similar to your courts that you have either. Yeah. Does that answer that?
Yeah, that's good, thank you.
We also have different courts like drug court and stuff like that as well. But it's a long conversation. But they're not necessarily having as good access for our law as non-Aboriginal people to some of the other special courts. Somebody will try and pin me on that back home in Australia, but
I have a question actually. Here on Turtle Island, it was illegal to really be native at all, like to be in ceremonies, to kind of dress in regalia, to have what the internet calls potlatches, powwows. It was all illegal. Like you go to prison being native, and I'm wondering, was it the same?
Yeah.
It was. How recently was that lifted?
So the laws are Australia, the Federation of Australia was formed in 1901, and when the national constitution was formed, there's a specific clause in that excluded Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, the natives, as being citizens of the new state. That was corrected when we weren't given the citizenship, but we were then counted in the census. And there was a national vote in 1967 that changed that. And then what occurred is each of the jurisdictions changed laws that they put in place to govern. I'm giving you a really long answer to this, but to govern the natives. So in New South Wales, there was the Natives Act, I think it's called something, and that was in place until 1969. And it was under that act where children could be removed to place when activities to gather to fly. So yeah, it was that, and yeah, each of the states had different laws. Like I said, Canada, Australia, and South Africa had similar laws, which was the basis of apartheid. South Africa was these laws never got repealed, and it's we had the same laws, and I'm sure you probably did as well. But yeah, does that answer that?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it was illegal to speak our own language, and to gather in more two people, we had to get a special license to be able to, permission to be able to be within the town after 5 o'clock, sort of thing, so that kind of stuff. They're pretty standard British colonial sort of thinking, basically.
Yeah.
So that was a bit of a look at the past sort of stuff we've finished. I'm happy to go on to this, and this is the last bit of this. So you're probably all falling asleep by now, but I thought I'd just talk to you a bit about some current research. And so I'm involved in a number of clinical trials, and so I think I said earlier, I'm a discipline in addiction medicine, so I know all these senior clinicians. And so although this first one isn't one of those ones. Involved in this as an investigator, Strong and Delicate project, which is looking at a computerized social emotional wellbeing program for high school kids. This is a national one, New South Wales, Queensland, Western Australia. And we're getting really good results for this. And this is probably the most progressed. This is the most progressed out of all those programs, and getting very good feedback of that at this point. Randomised controlled trial for Canada and Doyle. This has just gone live, and so this is an interesting bit of work. I'm leading or co-leading, I should say, the Aboriginal component of that. We're going to interview Aboriginal people about their experience. So this is a sort of smoking cessation, if you like. So a non-inferiority trial, text messaging versus Verseriland, or versus quitline. Somewhere. But this is sort of tobacco cessation project for lower socioeconomic groups, and that's just starting to go live now. I've got a lot of stuff that's just going live right now. Depot buprenorphine, which you've got different brand names for that. This is looking at the use of the depot buprenorphine, which is a for opioid type use, and so you get an injection that can be for, depending on which sort of injection you get, it lasts for a few days, for a week, or for a month or something. But looking at this in post-release, they're pretty much transferring everybody over to depot buprenorphine at the moment. What we're finding though is Aboriginal people are more likely to drop out of the treatment than non-Aboriginal people. And this has just started. So looking at sort of old amphetamine, this dexamphetamine, for methamphetamine withdrawal. Hopefully this just right now, basically. We're quite hopeful, but it's very, very hard to get amphetamine treatments for amphetamine. Gains are usually significant, but not wow out of the park. Like methadones had with opioids or depot have. So those are a couple of projects that are just started now. These are ones that I directly lead. This one is looking at contextual stuff around the client experiences, Aboriginal clients who are going into drug and alcohol treatment programs or a particular program. So the aim of this one is to just talk to the Aboriginal clients and see how they're going, and to contextualise some of the data that's collected. So they collect data and all kinds of stuff, but it doesn't tell the full story about some of this going. If you know where their main drug they've used and all of the statistical stuff. So this contextualizes that. So it's a downtown inner city drug clinic, and so it's mainly qualitative. So they've done about half the interviews for that, and then have to come over here. Pretty horrendous stories. Like, it's pretty full on. Some of the stuff that happened to these people. One person who shared their story, and they were basically raised. That was colonisation, given to this white family, and then put underneath the house to be brought up with the dogs. Stuff, so pretty horrendous stuff. But having said that, very positive experiences of accessing the drug and alcohol treatment program itself. Very stuff we love being that part. So that's continuing. This is a project why I'm here, but joined up with Etsy back in 2018 when I think I first met Professor Stewart when she came to Sydney University and started to develop this. So this is a sort of post-release and interviewing men in Sydney and also here in Toronto about the sorts of things they need to help them get on with their lives. So it's a qualitative project using yarning methodology, so which is more when you do a yarning method, it's more a conversation. So you can ask me as many questions as I ask you when you're doing that. You just talk about my life and things like that. So it's more of a relaxed method for that. And so that's finished all the interviews at Glen, and we've done about 10 res and if you want to do there. Some really strong similarities. So what I'm doing with this is what we'd call a complementary analysis. I'm not looking at saying things like, unlike Aboriginal Australians, it'll be more like if there's something unique that happens for Aboriginal Australians, we'll just say that without having to say that as a comparison to Native Canadians, if you get what I mean. So yeah, it's a different kind of way of just telling the story of what's happened. So 10 to 20 men in Sydney and Toronto and some sport workers. I told you a little bit about that pretty much already. You can see the impact of the residential school system within your criminal justice system is having the same effect within our prison system in Australia. So just finishing on this, I don't know how we're going for time. I can yarn. Have we got time? Not 50 minutes. Just cool. So this is a project I got funded recently. So it's culturally based national wellbeing program for youth in prison. And we finished the first round of data collection. So I actually got a grant for this. And this you can see is built on the previous work I've done. So I originally called it a healing program. Danny Manton, Aboriginal woman who's a CI, said don't call it a healing program because we're not going to talk about healing in prison, we're talk about well-being. And so I only use the term well-being. I took that on board and she's absolutely correct. We shouldn't talk about prison as a place of healing. Some of the reason why we wanted to do this is when we look at our own cultural models of healing, there's no pan-Aboriginal Australian identity, but there's some commonalities that we have culturally that we share between different groups. And we do have this sort of deeper healing. Often when we're talking about it, is the outcome and the drug use and the symptoms. We saw that from the presentation earlier about the symptoms, what's happened, and the way in which to deal. Talk about connection to country. You did teaching on land-based teaching, a similar kind of concept that you could actually go out of the country and do things. Culture as therapy, art therapy, music therapy, both contemporary art, traditional art, and contemporary and traditional music as well. There's something I was going to say, it's slipped my mind. So yeah, being in the majority, if you have a program, it doesn't have to be all Aboriginal, but if you're doing this as majority Aboriginal, you don't have to explain who you are. Like, it makes a big difference. People just kind of get you. And I kind of find that in a way here, when I say Aboriginal Australian, I find people just get you if you're Aboriginal Canadian. There's an understanding there. Credibility of staff, including lived experience. Often the facilitators of people running the groups that are Aboriginal men just got a different level of credibility and lived experience. So that's some of the basis of that. In terms of the project itself, I've got a few investigators there. Most of us are Aboriginal investigators. You've seen the staff there as well. The senior project officer, Alison, does an amazing job. We have an Aboriginal reference group for the Edith Collins Centre. We've got ethics through the Aboriginal Medical Research Council and the WA Aboriginal Health and Ethics Committee, but a few other places. These are the two that matter for my research. If I get ethics from the Aboriginal Ethics Committees, I'm happy. The rest of them are just like, whatever. Those ones are the ones that matter. So we've got sites in Broome, which is up near my homeland, and Perth, Western Australia, Central Coast and Sydney. Central Coast is like an hour from Sydney. So there's different phases of the project, pretty much through phase one, doing the data collection part, and also phase one's a scoping review. These are all so I won't go into detail, but these are just different bits of that. We're kind of landing at 1.3 now, where we haven't quite finished 1.1, but it's ended up being huge with lots of different programs found in different countries. Torres is doing incredible work with the number of programs used, but they also have a much larger proportion of prison populations, Maori. And this is the second phase, which is kind of what we'll be doing next year. So a Delphi study, once we've developed a program, which will then do a series of interviews to try and sculpt the program to making it a way in which that can be delivered. And then we'll do a suitability test. The other thing next year we'll be doing, putting in for a grant to actually run this in prisons in Australia as well. So that's my presentation. So thank you.
Anybody have any questions or comments or feedback or anything, including those online? Feel free to chime in. I personally have a comment just about how you connected your work in Australia to here. I think that's amazing, and congratulations on all of that. It's interesting to hear. It'll be interesting to see what you do next, really, and what comes of all of this. Like, it's a very exciting time, I guess. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say thank you for your work, and like, I support you. Keep going. It's gonna make an impact. I can already see it. And just thank you for this work.
Well, thank you. What you're doing here is pretty inspiring. Yeah. I'm just in awe of your leader. See, when I first met her, I thought, wow, I've got to be tough like that. But yeah, so I think it's we grow together is the thing. So hopefully we can build more links as we go forward. We have a lot in common, not just trauma, but I think, which is kind of one of the things that we have in common with the British colonial system, but culturally, our belief systems, our care for the land, those all things we have in common. So yeah. Grow together.
There's a part actually, if I may, where I've been hearing lately a lot about healing needed for the healers, for the support workers, for those frontline workers, people such as yourself, even many of us that work here with the trauma that we interact with so often. Are there things or are there plans being made to support people like you doing the work, going in and hearing these stories and analyzing these stories and kind of taking on that trauma and those like damaging events from people's lives and some of those stories? Is there anything to help support the healers?
When you're doing research, you should do as I say, and not as I do. Actually have debriefs and have counselling and do those things. I'm not that good at it. So yeah, there is more awareness of support for social emotional work, we tend to call it, rather than mental health workers, and so debriefs and supervision, cultural supervision, that kind of thing is more widely practiced. Relating it to me, the ceremony, the sweat lodge is exactly what I actually. Emotional thinking about it, but I just, it was like, it's the most amazing experience. I felt all of this stuff. I've been interviewing these people for weeks about stuff that was happening. And so, spending time out and doing being part of ceremony was incredibly important. So thank you for that.
Of course.
I also have a question kind of related, but just thinking about, because I was talking to someone, I do research on Indigenous homelessness at the Canadian Observatory. It's just so often too, we're hearing, really horrific stories. And I guess the concern is also around the people that are sharing their stories, how do you mitigate that being re-traumatizing for them? Because I was talking with someone who's involved in another project. It's in El Salvador, but some similar, horrific people that have experienced traumas, and they're saying like, it's great to, people want to tell their stories, but there's things that you need to do to make sure that they're okay too. And so I'm just kind of, trying to figure that out in my role at my job and doing this research. Like, how do we, because we provide, make sure that they have their own supports. We provide, elders for them to speak to after if they need, but I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts or ideas around that.
I get what you mean. When I'm interviewing, I think research is a little bit different, although it can be a bit traumatizing and remembering things. But if you're doing a therapeutic session, it's quite different.
Yeah, I guess I'm talking about the research, research context, but they're sharing their very deep personal stories. Yeah.
What I usually check in and say, how are you feeling? And I usually try to end the interview in a good space, talking about strengths and about positive stuff. But I do ask them how they're going. There's been only one occasion recently where I spoke to the staff at that service afterwards, and then I also checked on them the next day as well, and just went and said hello. And they seemed fine. He seemed to get a bit and what he's shared about was fine. Serious, what he spoke about. I also asked if he was still happy with the data being kept, and he was happy with that. He said he wanted the story to be told, even though it was one of like sexual abuse and stuff. But the other thing I found out is a lot of people have this disassociation. There's one guy said the most horrible story of he was working in sex workers for the Koki study and basically got picked up by these two men. He then decided after done that that they were going to give him a heroin overdose and kill him. And he said this and then I went and bought a hamburger and fries and then went home afterwards. And it was just when you play the tape back, the words used are just but the way in which it's expressed is a complete disassociation.
Disconnected.
From that, and I think that may be a protection thing. I'm not a psychologist, so those of you who are can probably explain that a bit more. But like I said, it was saying it like I went and ordered a hamburger. It's that was just what happened at that time. So, does that cover that?
I think so. I think it's it's complicated, but I know that too. I hear people that agree to share their stories say, well, I want to share my story, so no one, maybe it will help someone else, and maybe that will help things more broadly. So, but what about, I think that revisiting, making sure in a boundary way, checking in to see how they're doing maybe next day. I don't know. I guess there's boundaries there too, right?
There are, and you're not a therapist.
Exactly.
Particularly, some of us in research are therapists, but when you're a researcher, you're a researcher.
That's not the rule.
And you're not there as a therapist. People sometimes find it quite therapeutic.
I think, I think so too. think it, again, you mentioned empathy earlier, and I think that is a really important part, like that kind of empathetic active listening. I think that in itself, I've heard people that have shared their stories again say that that was, that was really helpful to them. So they
Yeah.
appreciated it.
People are kind of more happy to have a conversation.
And just ask firing a bunch of questions,
I
No,
do.
thank you, thanks.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting doing work in the prisons. I wanted to ask about how do you get into university and how do you study and how do you all those kinds of stuff. Because I find it fascinating. I don't meet many Kurima from universities.
Right, yeah.
Well, we're gonna wrap it up or close it out. So if there's any, I don't want to say final or last words, but is there anything else you'd like to add before we close?
I just want to thank my hosts. I want to thank Etsy for the leadership, for inspiration, and all of you at Walker Cadets. And yeah, so thank you.
With that, I will just close this out with a very simple prayer. Say Gitche Miigwech for our relatives across the salt water, and the safe travels, both making it here, but also on your way home. I hope that for you, the safe travels. I say Gitche Miigwech to Mother Earth, and Father Sky and everything in between, to the crawlers, the swimmers, the four-leggeds, the flyers, the Anishinaabe, the people, for all of my relations, for the medicines, for the teachings, for the fire, the water, for the winds, and for this vessel, and for this experience of what we call life. Gitche Miigwech, Gitche Miigwech, Gitche Miigwech, Gitche Miigwech, all my relations.